Emily, are
Sorry,
you
Paul, I missed that.
oh
Is that my
yeah,
cue? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
sorry. I did see that you
Oh, I
were
cannot hear you.
rejoining
Hang on.
because you got let me know if you can start to hear me. Can you hear us yet? Sorry, everyone, 1 second. All right. Well, while we're waiting for Emily to hopefully get her uh headset working, I will start us in with our meeting. Where Here it is. All right. Welcome to the November 19th, 2024, 43rd, uh, um, 43rd Democrats general meeting. Um, General meeting operations. If you need to seek the floor for any reason, please raise your hand by selecting the reactions in the meeting window and raise your hand. We'll call on you in turn. If we need to take a quick poll, we'll ask you to use the thumbs up or raise hand or yes, no, depending upon your version of Zoom. In the reactions panel. Sometimes during the meeting, we may have chat disabled, but you should still be able to message any of the co-hosts. If you have technical difficulties during the meeting, please email tally@43rddemocrats.org. If you need help with your voting code, please email tally@43rddemocrats.org. We are live streaming on YouTube. You can always watch the meeting again later there. As a reminder, our meeting norms are to treat each other with dignity and respect. And if you don't know, ask, step up, step back. We're all volunteers here. And so we depend upon you to help the meeting run smoothly and to contribute to the meeting. But please don't take up all the time in the meeting. And together we can have responsibility for staying on time and getting done by our 9 p.m. end time. We run via Robert's Rules. You don't need to know all the details about how to use Robert's Rules. If you want to make a motion, raise your hand and we'll help you get that constructed. Most of the motions start with I move, we approve, amend, postpone, the resolution, an action, etc. As a voting member, you have the right to participate fully in our meetings. If you need us to slow down and explain what's happening, raise your hand and ask. If you have questions as we go along, please ask. And again, a reminder that if you are a parliamentary rock star, use your powers for good, not evil, and consider the impact that your motions will have on the meeting and the group as a whole. We like to keep this as a welcoming space for new members. And so complicated motions that delay the meeting are put off to new members. And then finally, our land acknowledgement. As a reminder, the 43rd Democrats does pay rent to Real Rent Duwamish. Although we are all joining virtually tonight, we'd like to start this event acknowledging that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. And if you'd like to learn more about whose land you occupy and have occupied, see the map at native-land.ca. All righty. Emily, is your audio and video working again? If someone can just check to see if Emily is has got everything working, and I'll keep going. Oh, you're back. You able to hear me now?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes. Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry for that, everyone.
Thanks. Um, all right. We still don't have quorum, so I won't officially call the meeting to order. But you can see in the agenda here what we've got planned. There is a link to the September 2024 minutes. We did not have an official meeting in October due to quorum issues. So there are no minutes from the October meeting.
Can
Obviously,
you enlarge that?
oh, sorry. Yep. Give me 1 second. Let me alt tab over there and we'll go bigger. Wait, no, let me try it differently. Let me go this way. How's that?
Not big enough, but
Not big
thank you.
enough? Still bigger? All right.
That's better.
Let me go. Is that okay, Linda? All right.
That's
Uh,
okay.
okay. That's about as big as I think I can get it. Um, the link is also in the chat if you want to pull it up on your machine. Uh, it is November 19th. Obviously, we are after the election. As I'm sure you all are, I am disappointed in the national results of the election. We are in for a hard 4 years here with Trump and the GOP and the MAGA authoritarians in power. However, within Washington, we had some great results. At the state level, it was pretty much a clean sweep for Democrats. I believe the last results that I saw was that we expanded slightly our representation in the state house. We at least held firm on our representation percentage in the state senate. So we have a overwhelming but not yet super majority of the Senate. And so I am really looking forward to what we might be able to get done over the next few years with these representatives at the state level and what we might be able to do to protect Washington, Seattle, and the 43rd from the effects of a MAGA presidency. We will be hearing from our representatives later in the hour. So I'm looking forward to that and hearing what their priorities are. Also at the city level, Alexis Mercedes Rink was won with an overwhelming majority against Tanya Wu. I think this gives a pretty clear mandate for a Democratic progressive agenda. I'm glad as well that Tammy, excuse me, that Tammy Morales will have an ally on city council, and I'm looking forward to how the two of them might shift the conversation within the city in the coming months back to a more progressive direction. I'll just open it up here if there's any other, short comments anyone has about the election before I move on to other matters. If you do, just feel free to raise your hand and then unmute and all right. In December, we are planning to not have our regular general meeting. Instead, Justin is just telling me here that Sal Mungia won the Supreme Court race officially, which is good news since he was running against a MAGA candidate. It's great that he won. That was a pretty narrow victory. So Justin's saying by 0.6%. That is good news, particularly to help preserve rights and legislation that the legislature will hopefully be passing this coming session. Okay. Instead of the December meeting, we are going to have a festive holiday party on December 17th. That's the same normal Tuesday. This will be in person. It'll be in Wallingford. We will get out information on that in the coming week or so. The location is accessible by bus and bus from light rail. So for those who don't want to drive, there will be options for getting to the location via transit. And again, more information on that coming out. Second heads up is that the reorg of the 43rd board is happening January 21st. This is our regular third Tuesday, 7 p.m. time slot. For those of you who might be new since our last reorg and might be wondering what is a reorg. Every 2 years, we hold election of the board of the 43rd. And anyone who is an elected PCO is eligible to vote. And we will get more information out about the board positions that are open, which is all of them, but like we'll detail what the list of board positions are, and how you can submit your name in advance so that we can get some information about you, bio, why you're interested, things like that. And we will communicate this information out to the membership in advance of the meeting. One important thing to note is that you do not need to submit your name in advance to run. You can run from the floor. Our ask for the advance information is merely so that we can build a list of people who are interested so that the membership can understand who might be running and what their platforms and interest might be. So more details on that will be coming shortly as well. Next up, PCO terms. Those of you who are PCOs, whether elected or appointed, should have gotten a mail from Ryan earlier this week about the PCO terms. If you were an elected PCO for the 2023 to 2024 term, your PCO term is ending December 1st. Similarly, if you have been an appointed PCO, your term is ending December 1st. And starting on December 1st, those PCOs who were elected in the August primary, their term will start. And it is these PCOs whose term is starting on December 1st who will be voting for certain of the key board positions at the January 21st reorg. Oh, I should also mention, if you are not a PCO, there's a few positions which you cannot vote for: chair, vice chair, secretary, state reps, I believe are the lists. We'll make sure we're clear on that in the mail that we send out. But there are other board positions which any voting member can vote for. And so it's important that you do become a voting member. And one more thing on that, or maybe I'll have 5 more after I get through all of this. Our historical practice has been that if you renew your membership starting in December, that will count towards the next year as well. Typically, our membership runs from January to January, and with the reorg, we open that up to any membership that is renewed in December. So we'll also include that in the mail out to our mailing list and membership, to remind everybody that they can just start renewing their membership in order to have voting privileges in the January 21st reorg meeting. And true to form, there is a few other things. The reorg meeting is also an opportunity to pass changes to our bylaws, platform, and other things, if anybody has those. And so we'll include all this information in the mail to go out in the coming week or so. Okay, sorry, going back to PCO terms, look for the mail from Ryan to know to get updated on your PCO term either ending or starting, or both ending and starting, as the case may be. For those PCOs who are appointed PCOs who did not run for a PCO position in their precinct, and thus who are not elected PCOs, if your precinct is open, we will start accepting appointments for precincts, and we'll have more information about that and the process of how we'll be doing that in January, February, etc. So stay tuned for information about that as well. And then let's see, the last thing I've got on my agenda here is the social housing initiative. And Ryan, since you're back, help me make sure I've got this right. The rubric here is to vote yes, yes, and 1A in order to pass the social housing initiative funding.
Yeah, so it'll be yes. The first question will be, should either of these propositions be put forward? And you vote yes on that. And then it'll be which of these propositions, if either one is to be put forward, which one do you approve of, or do you vote for? And that's where you'll put proposition 1 or 1A. Okay. So it'll be yes and then 1A.
Okay, thanks.
And House Our Neighbors is going to be doing a lot of outreach that has a little picture that will show you exactly what it looks like. I will also send that graphic out so all of you can see it, probably in mid-January when ballots are coming out. So you have a nice picture of exactly what to do, because whenever we have these like dueling or alternative propositions, it can be really confusing.
And this is going to be on the February special ballot, correct?
Yep, it'll be on the February ballot along with the 2 school levies.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, just as a reminder, the social housing initiative funding initiative received enough signatures to be put on the ballot. City Council introduced a competing one to counter it and water it down. The 43rd Democrats has endorsed the 1A social housing initiative. And so we'll have more information about voting for that and how you can get involved in supporting House Our Neighbors, getting that across the finish line, and taxing extraordinarily wealthy people in order to fund social housing in Seattle. Let's see, we do not yet have quorum. If Liam, if you can put the tally form back in the chat again, I'd appreciate it. If you are a voting member of the 43rd and have not signed in yet, please sign in using your voting code, so we can determine if we have quorum to be able to hold votes on matters such as the resolution on affordable housing at Fort Lawton. All right, and with that, while we're waiting there, Ryan, if you wouldn't mind taking over and talking about the upcoming legislative session and how it works and how people can stay up to date.
Yeah, happy to. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
And no one sees my notes, right? You see just the screen I'm sharing? Okay, excellent. Always the fun tech challenge. So yeah, we knowing that we're going into our new state legislative session, we just wanted to do kind of an overview of how that process works and some different ways that you can follow along and get involved. For some of you, this might be a review. If so, awesome. Hopefully you get some little tidbits here and there that are new. For others of you, this might be completely new. So I'll try to balance the level of detail. So as you probably all know, our state is divided into 49 districts, and we have 2 chambers. We have 1 senator from each district and 2 House members from each district, so 49 senators and 98 members in our House. Our legislature runs on a 2-year cycle called a biennium. And they are a part-time legislature, which means that they're only active for a certain number of days each year. In odd-numbered years, like this year, we have what's called a long session, which is 105 days. In even years, we have what's called a short session, which is 60 days. One of the big differences between these 2 sessions, other than the number of days, is also when the major budgets are discussed and put through the process. So one of the primary duties of the state legislature is to pass 3 different budgets: an operating budget, a capital budget, and a transportation budget. Transportation, pretty straightforward, what that's going to cover. Capital budget is for things like structures and big capital projects, and then the operating budget is everything else. So ideas for bills come from a variety of different directions. State agencies can put forth ideas. The governor can put forth ideas. Lawmakers will have their own ideas. We have a variety of advocacy organizations around our state that help to craft different policy ideas. And of course, everyday average citizens reaching out to their lawmakers put those ideas together. As an interesting fact, only about 1 in 7 bills that ends up being put forward actually gets passed and turned into a law. So how does this process start? So after a legislator agrees to put a bill forward, they will become the prime sponsor for that bill, and they'll work with their legislative staff and stakeholders to draft the bill. The prime sponsor will then go to other lawmakers in their chamber and ask them to be co-sponsors of the bill. And then they'll take this bill with the co-sponsor signatures and they'll take it to the hopper and they'll drop it off. And this is when the code revisor's office is going to give it its number, right? So it might be HB something in the 1000s to usually the 2000s, or for House bill, and SB for Senate bill. They start in the 5000s for the numbering and go into the 6 or maybe into the 7000s, depending on how many bills we go through. Pre-filed bills, so lawmakers can start to pre-file bills early in December, and those pre-filed bills will start to go up on the state website. So if you want to start like looking at bills ahead of time and seeing what's being proposed, our state legislative website is actually really awesome. It's won some awards for being like really easy to use. It has a ton of information on it. So if you've never messed around with it, it's really, really cool, and I highly recommend going and poking around there. And then once session starts, bills will go through what's called their first reading, which is where they'll be introduced into the chamber of origin. So if it's a House bill, it'll go to the House. If it's a Senate bill, it'll go to the Senate. The first reading is usually just going to be the first couple of like the first sentence and like the last sentence, and then it's read in. And then that bill will make its way over to a policy committee. A quick little side note here. Sometimes a bill gets introduced into both chambers at the same time. These are called companion bills. They do get different bill numbers because one's in the House and one's in the Senate. And there can be multiple reasons for doing this. Sometimes we're not sure which chamber is going to end up being more friendly to a bill, and we're going to see which one makes it a little bit further. Sometimes the whole purpose of the bill, especially if it's its first year, is to just socialize it so people have an understanding of what it does. And so you can socialize it in both chambers, so both chambers get exposed. As bills go through the process, usually bills are going to start to accumulate differences because the House and the Senate, as it goes through different committees, are going to put different amendments on it. The bills are going to look a little bit different from each other. Oftentimes, one of these bills will just it'll die. It'll not continue along its process. And the other bill that remains will be called the vehicle, and that'll be kind of the bill that continues to move forward. But on rare occasions, both of those companion bills can make it all the way through both of the processes simultaneously, which is, doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. So once this bill is drafted and sent to its first chamber, we're going to go through a cycle. It'll go through committee hearings and then go to a floor debate. If it passes, it gets voted on the floor and passes. It'll go to the second chamber where there will be another series of committee hearings and floor debate. And then it'll go to the governor for him either to sign it or to veto it. So in each of these chambers, the typical process that a lot of these bills are going to follow, they're going to start in a policy committee. The policy committee is going to be the committee that is, focuses on the most relevant topic for what that bill's on. Some bills will go to multiple policy committees if they've got multiple policy areas that they're related to. If the bill has any sort of fiscal impact, after it goes through the policy committee, it'll go to the fiscal committee. That is related to it. There are different fiscal committees in the House, and so it'll depend on what fiscal impact it has and how it impacts finances. From the fiscal committee, it then goes to the rules committee. The rules committee, as we'll talk about in just a little bit, is kind of like a holding tank, and then it'll go on to the floor vote, and then in the second chamber, it'll continue this flow. So let's, what manages a lot of these bills and what kind of holds the tracker that they're all running against is the session cutoff calendar. So this is the cutoff calendar for 2024. So it's a little, again, 2024 was a short session, so these are shorter dates. But these are the days when most bills are going to have to be past a certain hurdle in order to maintain their, maintain going through the process. So, for example, the last day to read into a committee, the last day for a committee to get out of a committee, these are often called, the cutoff dates. And these are often what, when you're doing advocacy, people are going to be telling you about. They're going to be like, this bill that we really care about is the cutoff date is coming up. We need to get it out of this specific committee. And if you're ever wondering, why are they rallying around, it's not even getting passed yet, this is just a committee, it's because we're wanting to keep bills ahead of the cutoff dates so they can continue to go through the process. There are a select number of bills that are titled as being necessary to implement the budget that don't have to follow this process. The budget is a great example of this. The budget does not follow all of these timelines, but for most bills, this is going to be what's dictating the speed at which they're trying to move through things. Here's a list of what were the committees in our last biennium. These might be adjusted in this coming biennium. As you can see, things like agricultural and natural resources, civil rights and judiciary, education. You can see a couple of different capital budgets, appropriations, finance, a couple of different places where fiscal committees are going to come into place. And then, of course, on both sides, you'll see the rules. The Senate has less people, so it has less committees, which means, there's just less committees. Let's see. So the policy committee, this is where bills are going to go after they've gotten their first reading. They'll go to the policy committee. Committee staff prepare what's called a bill report. When you go to the Washington State Legislative website and you click on a bill, often you will be, you'll always be able to go and access those bill reports as you go through. They are really, really helpful, especially if you are not fluent in reading bill language. Bills are written in very specific language, and they can sometimes be challenging to understand. The bill reports will have a summary at the top of them that usually makes it a lot easier for you to know what is this bill doing. And subsequent bill reports, as bills go through the process, will often also tell you how bills have been modified as they've gone through the process as well. So bill reports are one of the best go-to spaces if you want to get a good understanding of what's going on with a bill. So the committee chair, in consultation with other members of the committee, are going to decide which bills are going to get a hearing within their policy committee. As a hearing requires a bill to, you have to go through a hearing in order for a bill to advance. The primary sponsor typically will introduce the bill. So they'll show up and they'll say, this is what this bill does, and answer any quick questions. And then there's opportunity for stakeholders, the public, other people to come and give comments on those bills. The chair then decides whether the bill is going to move to what's called an executive session. So executive sessions are when they are going to actually take votes on the bill. Usually there will be a hearing, there will be a chunk of time, and then there will be an executive session. Not always, but generally. And the executive session is when they will not only vote on the bill, but also any proposals for amendments and modifications to the bill will be made there. Afterwards, like we said, they'll go to the next committee or directly into rules if it doesn't have any fiscal consequences. Fiscal committee. Okay, so any bill that's going to have a fiscal impact, either on state or local government, so that's requiring new spending, changes how money is spent, changes the tax code, is going to have a hearing at a fiscal committee. Some bills, like the budget, are referred to a fiscal committee first, while others have a hearing in a policy committee and then are referred to the fiscal committees. In Senate, this is the Ways and Means and the Transportation Committee, because remember, transportation is one of our 3 budgets. In the House, this will be appropriations, capital budget, finance, or, you guessed it, transportation. The Senate Ways and Means Committee writes the state's operating budget, and every bill with a fiscal note is going to go through Senate Ways and Means. So very powerful committee. Okay, next up is the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is probably the most opaque of the committees to both understand and to know what's going on. So the Rules Committee controls which bills are going to advance for the consideration of its chambers. So bills that have reached the Rules Committee are under what's called Rules Review, and some bills are just going to go there, and that's where they're going to die. They can be sent back to the Rules Chamber from the chamber floor as well. So each committee member on the Rules Committee can pull a certain number of bills from the review calendar to the consideration calendar. So the consideration calendar is the bills that can be pulled onto the floor. And bypassing rules is possible. Bills that aren't going to move out of rules can sometimes be put into special files. But the main thing to know about the Rules Committee is it's often, it's not a committee that has like meetings that you can go and you can watch. So oftentimes you're just trying to watch on the state's legislative tracker, like as bills get like tracked that they're moving through this process. And this is one of the most challenging parts to understand sometimes where bills are going as we go through. But if they make it onto the consideration calendar, they can then be pulled onto the floor. And this is the most, exciting part when everyone's down on the floor and we're going to do, the big final set of votes. And again, there's an opportunity for there to be amendments and modifications to the bill. So bills are placed on the floor calendar, and then they're giving when they're placed on the floor calendar, they're given a status of what's called the second reading. And then when they get pulled to the floor, they'll go through their third reading. And then bills can be amended, and they get their third reading. They go through a vote. And then if they make it through that vote, they'll go over to the second chamber. And we repeat this process again. So they'll again go to a committee, usually a policy committee, sometimes a fiscal committee, go into the rules again, wait for it to get pulled on the floor, vote for the final time. As we noted, when bills are going through these different chambers, they're going to accumulate different amendments, different strikers, different modifications to them. And so the bill that the House passes and the bill that the Senate passes very often are not exactly the same bill. And so they have to go through a process called reconciliation. Changes between the versions of the bills need to be reconciled. And so the bill will first go back to its original chamber. So let's say a bill started in the House, it went through the House, we passed one version, it went through the Senate, we've now got another version. The Senate will send their version back to the House and say, hey, House, are you okay with just like doing what we came up with? So the first chamber gets to accept the second chamber's changes or reject them. If the second chamber doesn't, if the first chamber doesn't, then the second chamber has an option. And if neither can agree, then they'll go into, there are a couple of different ways that they can resolve that. But often they'll issue they'll go into a where's my notes in this? Or they'll go into, Jamie, you need to remind me the name of this. It's anyway, they get a group of lawmakers from both sides together, and they hash out what it's going to look like, and they put together what they call a conference
You're
report.
thinking of a.
Go for it. What do you we all get, like, you get everyone together, they come up with, yeah. So
It's a conference committee.
conference committee, there we go, thank you. And they build a conference report. That makes perfect sense. So conference committee members from both chambers get together, they figure out what a compromise can be, they issue a conference report, and then each of those chambers have to vote on the conference report in order for it to go forward. And then, of course, we have our governor, and so bills passed go to the governor. He has 5 days to sign, veto, or to partially veto the bill, or 20 days if that bill passed in the last 5 days of the session. And if the governor does nothing, the bill becomes a law. The legislature can override vetoes with a 2/3 majority. And then the Secretary of State puts the bills into like the session law number and incorporates it into the RCW, which is the Revised Code of Washington, which is the list of all of our laws. So how can you, so that was kind of an overview of the process, but we also wanted to highlight some different ways that you can stay up to date with what's going on. One way, and this is my own biased pitch, one way that I love to stay involved is with a group called 350 Washington. They're a coalition of 11 environmental and social justice groups around the state. They send out a twice weekly email with easy to take actions, information on the bills, link to additional resources. You can choose what actions you do and don't want to take. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible for people to both know what's going on and to express their opinion on bills. Some news sources that tend to follow what's going on the state level include the Washington State Standard and the Urbanist. Urbanist, of course, brings a very urbanist perspective to what's going on, but you know, that's awesome. And then Hacks and Wonks is a really great podcast that often does a lot of engagement around state stuff. And then I encourage everyone who has like their own advocacy groups, because I'm guessing most of you probably have advocacy organizations you're attached to that send you out emails that are like, hey, there's this bill on this thing that I know you care about because you're connected with us and we do advocacy on the environment or school funding or civil rights. So if you have any particular advocacy organizations that you like to follow, I encourage you to throw them into the chat so that people can check them out. There are a lot of organizations across our state who do really, really great work of following along with this process and helping to make really easy actions for all of us to know what's going on and to share with each other. And with that, I will stop my share and pass it back to Paul. And thank you all for, hopefully that was a little bit of a good primer. And Jamie and Nicole, please correct anything I said that's incorrect, and I'll make a note in the slides for the next time we give this presentation.
Any questions that anyone has for Ryan? And Ryan, thank you very much for pulling this together and giving us this quick overview here.
Yeah, Brandon had a question in here of how rule committee members are determined. From my understanding, that's made during committee assignments, which is happening around right now. And so as they're also determining like who are the chairs of different committees, they determine who is on those committees. So that's a decision that the different parties make amongst themselves with all of their members and leadership.
Any questions from anyone?
This is also great because we have other experts here. So you can ask questions I don't know the answer to, and I can pass it on to actual representatives who know this stuff better.
Okay. All right. Thank you very, very much, Ryan. All right. We are now turning to a conversation with our elected representatives. We have here, of course, Jamie Peterson. Thank you for joining, Jamie. We'll spotlight you. We also have Nicole Macri. Thank you, Nicole. And we have our newest legislative representative, Sean Scott. Congratulations, Sean. Great to have you on board with your very resounding victory. Excited to have you representing the 43rd. And then finally, we also have with us Alexis Mercedes Rink, who does not represent us in the Washington State Legislature. Am I not allowed to spotlight 4 people? There we go. Got it. Does not represent us in the Washington State Legislature, but is our citywide council person for District 8. And we'll be starting next week, is it? Next week. Very excited. And again, another resounding election result there. And just to let Jamie and Nicole don't feel left out, both of them have also been elected with overwhelming majorities, I think in their cases around 98% or something like that. So, and hopefully we haven't lost Jamie. We're getting some screen buffering issues there. So thank you all for joining us. What I wanted to do here is have a bit of a conversation in the wake of the election, both the incredible results that we had at the Washington State and in Seattle level, as well as the rather disappointing federal election, with an eye on what are your priorities, and what might we be able to do over the next few years as we're trying to safeguard Washington State, Seattle, the 43rd District from the impacts of a MAGA administration, as well as not just, protect ourselves, but also build as Sean's campaign used very effectively, a better Washington. And so with that, if you all can just give us like a minute or so of like, what's your top of mind? I've got a few questions. We'll open things up to the attendees for questions as well. We'll have at it. And Jamie, why don't we start with you? You were just elected, if I got my terms right, president of the, no, not president, this is the head of something, top dog of the Senate, something like that.
Senate Majority Leader.
Senate Majority Leader. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to Ryan for a great presentation. There are a few fine points that I'd be happy to talk to you about later, but generally it was a really good overview and appreciate that. I would say for us are really going to be around housing. And districts all around the crisis because of our failure to fund we have a statewide crisis. We'll be working very hard. Both of those issues, we are going to need to consider additional revenue. And so I think we're going to use the crisis that we have in terms of the significant budget shortfalls as a way to have a conversation about and hopefully make some progress on making our tax system more progressive and causing wealthy people and businesses to pay a fairer share of the needs of the state. So, look forward to the discussion and questions.
Thanks, Jamie. Jamie, your audio was cutting in and out, and so it might help to just cut video to help with that audio. Fortunately, we got this whole windstorm thing going on. Nicole, I'll turn it to you next as our ranking member. Is that the right term? Longer serving member of the House for the 43rd.
Yeah, thank you so much, and sorry for this unusual lighting here. I am in my car as I'm darting from thing to thing this evening, but it's great to be here. Yeah, so Jamie covered it, I think, really well. I'll say I work on the state operating budget. I'm a vice chair on the appropriations committee, and so the budget challenges that Jamie referenced are certainly been taking up a lot of my time and energy. And the big issues, in addition to housing and public education, I'll say are we are continuing to look at the impacts of the indicators that we're hearing about the Trump administration coming in. We did tremendous work last time Trump was president to put numerous protections in state law that before that we depended just on federal protections. But as we're hearing new things, we are looking at to make sure that the protections we have in Washington are solid. And I particularly work in the healthcare and health policy area, and I've had a number of people reach out to me about health-related protections, particularly related to abortion access, which we did a tremendous amount of work on over the last 2 years. Also gender affirming care, not just what the administration can do, but what we see coming ahead from the Supreme Court as well. So I'm working on issues such as that. But the big issue, I think, is going to be the challenges with the budgets, and sitting right on that is the public education. But we're not going to turn our attention away from continuing to respond to the affordable housing needs across the state, and the behavioral health needs, and the climate action that, we're really just so delighted that the voters of Washington upheld the policies that the majority Democrats led on in the legislature. They rejected the narrative from conservatives and from, multi-millionaires trying to turn back the policies that we passed in support of childcare, early learning, public education, climate action, and long-term care. And so we will continue to work in those policy area spaces, knowing that we have the voters behind us on them.
Thank you, Nicole. Sean.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Paul. Representative Macri and Senator Peterson said it about as well as you can say it. Alexis, good to be with you as well. I think that there's a kind of a sense right now that maybe we have two legislative priorities in front of us that actually, I think, kind of intertwine with one another in ways that Representative Macri illustrated. There is the typical work of funding education, building the housing that we all need, expanding disability services, making Washington a more sustainable state that we would have been going about the work of implementing regardless of what happened at the federal situation. And now I think we have a separate, or I should say a carved out set of legislative priorities that has to do with the response to the federal situation. I do believe that there is significant overlap between these two sets of concerns that will be in front of the Washington State Legislature. We are faced with the very real prospect of having a dismantled Department of Education before next year is out. No better time to fully fund education, which I know is a priority for many of our members. We are facing a potential decline in federal spending for very important transit projects, which was a concern already for many people across the state. I think we're also going to be facing a crackdown on civil liberties and on dissent. I'm, I guess, old enough to remember, if I can say, the original Trump administration, where within a few months of him getting elected, we saw mass protests, freeways, airports. I don't believe that there are going to be many people in the 43rd legislative district in specific that are going to back down from that fight and from what a Trump presidency represents. So I think now is a very good time to make sure that we're taking care of the civil liberties of people that are going to be out exercising their right to free speech and exercising their right to push back. One last point I want to hit. I mean, I know that former Attorney General Ferguson, now our governor, really made use of the arena of consumer protections as a way for the state of Washington to chart a different course from what the Trump administration laid out for the country a number of years ago. I think that the bills that we will be seeing before us in that committee in specific are going to have elevated importance beyond what they would have had already. So this is not the fight that I think any of us really wanted. The work of trying to figure out how we want to go about stewarding federal resources appropriately would have been hard enough. And this is going to be a very difficult fight, but this is the one that we have. And I know that many of us in the legislature are going to be up for it. And I know that we have at least one friend on the Seattle City Council that is going to be up for making sure that we have a more progressive Seattle in this climate, in Alexis as well.
Thank you, Sean. And again, very, very glad that you're our representative in Olympia. Alexis, excited to have you as our citywide representative for Seattle.
Thanks for having me. I feel a little bit like the odd one out, but I'm really quite grateful to be here and want to thank again the membership of the 43rd, all of the PCOs. Thank you for your support, your endorsement. We won. We won by a large margin, and we built such a strong coalition between the Democratic Party, between Labor, and a number of amazing advocates. I'm so proud of our coalition because it truly gives me hope about how we'll weather the years to come with a change in a presidential administration. And as we're looking at the impacts of a new presidential administration, leading up to the primary, I took a look at what was in Project 2025 to start understanding what could be coming our way. Now, of course, we don't fully know everything that's coming our way. We don't know if Project 2025 is the plan, but I did spend some time with the document and actually published a piece with The Stranger just to try and pull out some pieces and reflect how could the implementation of some of the policies within that document show up in Washington State. And there's a number of things detailed in that article. I'll drop the link there. Some of them being, explicit policies around rescinding Medicaid funding for states that require private insurance to provide abortion access. Washington is one of 9 of those states. There's a number of things in there that are also attacks on fundamental labor protections and undermining the National Labor Relations Board that, of course, would impact our ability to organize. And then there's the clear piece that I think everyone here has spoken to, which has been just the loss of federal funding for major infrastructure projects, but then also thinking about funding for HUD, for our local HUD offices, and so on. And so we don't fully know what's coming, but we do know from our local history, we've historically seen Seattle City Council step up to the moment to protect rights and access. And I'm specifically referring to the previous City Council's actions to establish legal protections for those seeking an abortion in Washington State. That there was a series of 6 pieces of legislation that did go through our council to affirm and protect access, as well as funding that went to the Northwest Abortion Access Fund. So we've seen a local history of city council also taking steps to safeguard services and create legal protections. And so looking ahead, what can we be doing to make sure that we are proactively trying to make sure that we're locking things down? I think communication and what you can expect from my office is a lot of communication related to how we might be seeing things show up on the federal front and how it will be impacting things locally. I'm also putting front and center that there has been very clear language of a border czar of sorts and mass deportations. What does this mean for our region in terms of cooperation with ICE, for example? That is something I'm prioritizing discussion with other local leaders on what does this mean for our community? And lastly, I think I'd just encourage as well in this time, Washington, we haven't named it, but Washington did go to the left We were one of two states that shifted to the left, comparatively. And I think there's a lot that we can be doing on the local front and with our neighbors, and really focusing in locally on how we can be building a community that I think we all really want to live in. And so, again, really excited at the opportunity to serve. I'm very focused on making sure that we are prioritizing, not just the stand-up of our office, and hiring a team that can really live out and support the policies that we put forward in the race, but also making sure that we're clear-eyed, that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we are meeting this moment where we need strong local leadership and strong local partnership to weather this time. And so with that, as a final logistics note, I'm officially taking office next week. So I start a week from today, and we'll have a formal swearing in on December 3rd with the public, and I hope you all can join. And happy to also take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, all four of you. And just to talk to your odd person out here, Alexis, one of the reasons why I was really interested in having you is that we are the 43rd. We're entirely within Seattle. Seattle is obviously the largest city within the state. We have many of the problems that the state has in terms of need for progressive funding, for housing. Seattle schools is in a slow, maybe not so slow, death spiral, it seems. Which is, of course, greatly impacted by the state. And if I recall the news reports correctly, Alexis, you have won more votes in Seattle than any Seattle politician in history, including any of the mayors. And between that, Sean's win, Nicole and Jamie's continued wins, it feels like we have a pretty strong mandate here for strong progressive policy. So one of the things I wanted to ask amongst the four of you is, Seattle has these problems. I think that, the thing I would pose is that a partnership between state and city in order to address these problems is critical. What amongst the four of you do you think we can do together in order to address these issues more strongly from what appears to be a strong mandate across Washington for a democratic agenda in order to really shift the needle on progressive revenue, on housing, funding for schools, healthcare, et cetera? Essentially, how will we not squander what looks to be a strong mandate from the voters over the next 2-4 years? I'll just open to any of the four of you to jump in on that.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in there by saying that when I was first elected, I was elected on the same day that Donald Trump was first elected, back in 2016. And so I found out of the gate that, establishing a really strong partnership with local electeds, both at the city and county level, was really important, because the immediate impact on local residents is often first observed and seen at the local level, and sometimes doesn't always filter up to state policymakers or state agencies. And so that partnership was really essential. I will say I've worked to reach out to everyone who's currently on the Seattle City Council. And of course, Alexis and I have worked closely together as she has campaigned for her seat, and I'm just so delighted that she will be joining the Seattle City Council. And so I do think that is important, and I think that working closely on the issues that where the local government can play an important role. So in the creation of housing, in the protection of housing, I've been in conversation, for instance, we put strong state protections in law several years ago for immigrant residents of our state. And I feel confident that Seattle will uphold that law. I feel less confident that some other communities in Washington will uphold that law. And so that partnership at the local level is important, but our work across the state to make sure that all communities are following state law as it relates to key protections for our residents is going to be something that I think state agencies, our governor, and state legislatures are going to have to continue to find ways to work on.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think
Sean?
about Paul, what it would, in response to your question, what it would look like to have a legislators and an organizers approach to many of these issues. I think in the work that I had done as a lobbyist with Solid Ground prior to getting elected, we really tried to center the idea that people who are the most impacted by decisions that were being made in the legislature deserve to have their voices heard as those decisions were being made, because we knew that we would get better legislative outcomes on a number of issues, from the working families tax credit, consumer protections issues, expanding the social safety net. And I think that a similar approach would work with respect to many of the issues that are facing our state presently in the age of Trump 2.0. I think about the fact that in the 43rd legislative district, I mean, we run our election by roughly the same margin that the state overall elected to retain its capital gains tax. It was by about a 70-30, 68-32 margin, somewhere in there. And I believe that that is instructive, because what that suggests is that there is a strong parallel between past legislative achievements and the hopes that people have that new lawmakers will continue and build on and expand on many of those. When we hear directly from teachers that need more resources, directly from students that would benefit from education being more fully funded, when we hear directly from renters in our district, which is 71 or 72% renter, when we hear directly from people who have a need for more housing options for people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, we're going to get better legislative outcomes as a result. All of those things are going to make the state much stronger. And so I think that that has to be a core part of our strategy as well. I think making sure that we're elevating the folks who handed over that mandate that you described to the electeds that are on this call, past and more recent.
I'm gonna chime in on kind of a relational piece of this. And maybe it's because we were just all at the doors campaigning a few weeks ago, but thinking about how do we keep that up? I'm mindful we're officially in the big dark of Seattle, and people are retiring in early and hermiting. I'm guilty of hermiting myself, but how are we continuing to just on the basis of talk to our neighbors in an organized way about what's happening, how are we seeing it show up locally, and what can we do? I just think a way to really build it into, just the relational piece of how do we keep up the energy around just really baseline talking about what is continuing to happen. How are we seeing the city respond in response to things? I thought I saw a hand. Is that Linda? I'd love to take a question.
I have a related question to what you just said, if
Yeah.
I may.
Yeah, go for it, Linda. Thank you.
I don't know if this is a valid source, but I know that Nextdoor does bring neighbors together to express their opinions. And I'm wondering how much you pay attention to that as a source of input, especially in these days when, as you said, it's the big dark. But one of the things I see consistently over and over and over again is a series of comments that this happened, I had a break-in, I had a theft, I had a package theft, I had this weird thing happen on my street. There's somebody out there screaming, and the police don't come. So why even call them? And it seems to me that when we talk about shifting to social services and intervention, that's a great direction to go. But we also, for years, have had only one patrol car operating on graveyard shift in the entire area of Seattle north of the Ship Canal. Now think about what a huge territory that is, and how much that lack of public safety support really undermines the ability even to figure out who needs help. So I hope you will think about what I'm seeing a number of times in that community forum about what people say they need and what they're concerned about.
I appreciate you raising that. And I recently did a ride along actually with the North Precinct just to see firsthand, that whole experience and what it's like in the evening time. And I was similarly shocked that the North Precinct is truly everything above the Ship Canal. It's a giant swath, like it includes Lake City all the way out to Ballard, UW. It's a huge geographic swath. And something I noticed in that process was how many calls came through that were related to, settling family disputes, like so and so moved out of my house and they took my passport. Can you come help? Or so and so, there was this amount of property damage. And that was kind of an interesting learning too, thinking about who are our responders, and what is having community-oriented response look like, and how do we make sure that there's the right person responding to things. But that was a big learning for me, and hearing that, I'm not currently on Nextdoor. I don't know who else is on Nextdoor, but I know that surprisingly locally, Reddit has been an interesting neighborhood source that got me tuned into something that was happening last weekend. Anyone who saw the helicopters over Capitol Hill last weekend, I got to learn what was going on through there. So, learning along the way, how we build response systems too that work for people. Because there can be a lot of different responders also for different situations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jamie, I just wanted to give you a chance to speak as well to the state local partnership in light of what looks to be a progressive mandate for the district and for the state at large.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the progressive mandate. I think when all the votes are counted, we actually, as it turns out, went a little bit to the right as a state. But certainly the Democrats in legislature are going to have the largest majorities that we have had in many years, and we plan to use those to good effect. I would say in terms of the partnership between the city and the state, probably the most important place for us to work together is on housing, because we have shared responsibility both for, we have shared responsibility for housing. We provide a lot of the regulations at the state level, although the city also does. And we provide a lot of funding, but share that responsibility with the city as well. We have other local government, such as the school district, that we have here. We're responsible for ourselves in terms of raising money, and we bear the responsibility for extremely regressive tax system, and therefore have the obligation to try to bend that to be more progressive. And the city, in that way, has been a good partner, helping to sort of pilot and point the way for us toward a better revenue system. So I think, for example, there will be significant consideration of a higher earner payroll tax in the upcoming legislative session that is modeled on the Jumpstart tax in Seattle. So those are a few of the ways that I expect that we'll continue to work together.
Do you see a possibility of wealth tax, income tax, other progressive taxes to help fill this gap that, you know, we likely will see with the Trump administration?
Well, the gap doesn't have anything to do with the Trump administration. I mean, there may be at the margins, there may be some places where there's some attempt to cut money to us, but primarily that is because we had but an assumption that sales tax revenue would go in the way that it did early in the pandemic. And in fact, it has not, because there was an unusual blip of a lot of purchases of goods during the pandemic. So as that curve has flattened out, then it turns out we do not have as much revenue. As a result, we're looking at a shortfall just on the what we call the maintenance level budget of somewhere between $13 and $14 billion over the next 4 years. And we also have a shortfall in the transportation budget, largely due to as we had anticipated, of roughly $8 billion over the 10-year period. So that is the beginning problem that we're going to be facing when we return to Olympia.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely. I think it's a great point that the senator just made, the idea that Washington State has a number of revenue issues, holes in our programmatic funding that we have to own, that are our fault, that predated, you know, Trump getting elected the second time. I think it's part of the reason why a number of social service advocates in specific, people who really care a lot about, you know, seeing Washington State increase its investments in housing, education, are a little bit troubled sort of by the I'm going to call it the idea that we're going to sort of cut our way out of a number of these issues, because a $10 billion budgetary shortfall, as is being projected, that's $10 billion worth of services. We have to think of it in those terms. That's $10 billion worth of schools, $10 billion worth of any number of programs that we all depend on. So, and that's simultaneous to the state of Washington giving over hundreds of millions, literally hundreds of millions of dollars of various kinds of tax subsidies of various kinds to some of the biggest corporations in the country, so that we're going to have some real hard decisions that are going to be in front of us. And, you know, it's often said that budgets are moral documents, which I think means that they can be immoral as well, when people who, you know, are depending on a lot of these programs for an economic lifeline get shuttled off of them. That's going to be something that's going to cause a lot of pain. I remember, I think it was Representative Ruth Kagi had talked in Crosscut a couple of years ago about some of the cuts that had to be made in the 2011, 10 or 11 session. The number of people that, you know, were really counting on many programs as an economic lifeline during the Great Recession and the aftermath of it. We don't want to have a repeat of that. We don't want to have, you know, lawmakers being interviewed in 10 years about how things went in the 2025 session and expressing regret over not doing more to balance out our tax code to fund the services that we all use. So I think that that's going to be a priority for many of us in the state ledge as well.
Thank you. I don't want to dominate the questions here. So if there's additional questions from anyone in attendance, just raise your hand and we'll call on you so you can ask. Richard.
Yes. Just a second, let me get the video. How much of Trump projected punitive decrease is anticipated to add to the $10 billion deficit in the state? And how is that going to impact legislation that has any sort of fiscal price tags to it. How's that for an all-inclusive question?
Yeah. Jamie, did you want to take that?
Well, you're probably closer. I mean, I guess what I would say, Richard, the reality for us is that in the time frame that we'll be making the budget, it's unlikely that Congress and the president are going to have accomplished much. So, some rules that we use about new and spending, and I don't know that we'll have for 2025 for this budget. I don't know that we'll have decisions from the federal government that will start to affect that. That's probably more likely that we would see when we do the supplemental budget in 2026.
So guesstimating isn't part of the budget process then?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, certainly there's a caseload forecast and there's a revenue forecast, and those nonpartisan processes spit out numbers, and then we work within that framework. And then if we don't have enough money from that, we can pass new taxes to add to the ledger. That's a difference. When Sean was mentioning a comment from Ruth Kagi about the 2011 session, one difference now is that because we did the lawsuit to overturn the Eyman initiatives, we now have the ability to pass taxes by a simple majority. So we're not trying to do the balancing with one hand tied behind our back. But we basically have to live within the nonpartisan folks make about what budget resources we have to live with. So those change, and as we start to learn information about what Congress will actually do, that'll probably change the forecasts, both the revenue forecast and the caseload forecast. But I think it's unlikely to happen in time for the decisions that we'll have to make in the 2025 session.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think we're watching. I mean, I'm cringing every time I see a new cabinet, appointment or nomination from the new administration. So I think long term, we'll have to see what happens. But I think there are some things that we're more pessimistic on for sure. Issues like federal funding for school meals, for continued subsidies for individual insurance premiums. What the future might bring in terms of regulatory challenges in the implementation of Medicaid waivers that we have. So in the areas where where there's large infusions of federal dollars in the state budget, I think we're not expecting abrupt cliffs on those dollars, but we're looking a lot more pessimistically about the sustaining or increasing of resources from the federal government. So that certainly is an issue. I'll say I was at a budget conference last week with legislators from across the country, and my sense from that is that Washington is in a more challenging position with our budget because of our tax code. That most states are saying that their corporate income tax, their individual income tax is really their leveling elements to their tax code that we do not have in Washington state. And because we are so dependent on consumption through sales tax, that when we see this decrease in projections for sales tax, our state budget and all the services and supports for Washington residents really take a hit. So some of the challenges that we're seeing in the City of Seattle budget are similar, although there are particular drivers at the city level that impact the revenues. At the city, sales is one of them, REIT is another one. So we have, we're very, at the city level, very dependent on growth to sustain the expenditures of the city. And at the state level, you know, we're very dependent on sales tax, B&O tax, and property tax. And so I am really hopeful, you know, as Jamie said, back during the Great Recession, which was the budget situation we're facing going into this biennium is the worst budget situation we faced since the Great Recession, although it is not as terrible as then, in part because there really was not a path to revenue of any sort because of that 2/3 requirement. And now there is a path to revenue, and Democrats have been engaging in conversation about that for several months now. And so there's a lot of groundwork that has been laid ahead of going into session. And we're really leading with our values on that. So while we have a timing challenge for sure, it is much, just speaking practically, it is much easier to turn the dials on existing tax revenue than it is to implement a brand new tax, because it just takes time, just practically speaking, for Department of Revenue to stand up a new kind of tax collection. And then, I mean, we can just look to this past election to know that there will be challenges to any new revenue stream that we implement. And so we will be, I think, talking about how do we align the timing of need for a state expenditure with the revenue options that we will be considering. But we are leading with our values to really look at the kind of progressive reform we know that will help sustain the investments in our communities for the long term.
Thank you. Alexis?
I wanted to chime in briefly on some other election outcomes. I know we're really focused, of course, naturally on the outcome of the presidential, but we did have all these statewide initiatives, and luckily most of them did not pass. We did see the passage of 2066 related to gas usage, and I think it's just important to also name quickly how we'll see the passage of that initiative show up locally. The committee that I will be chairing on City Council is our City Light, Sustainability, and Arts and Culture Committee. It's actually all in one. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge. But in the sustainability portion of our work, we're actually overseeing the rulemaking process for this legislation that was passed in 2023, known as our Building Emissions Performance Standards, also known as BEPS. And this has everything to do with gas usage in buildings and how we actually support a transition to cleaner energy. And it spans across this legislation essentially details out a timeline for how we would move towards greener energy and support that transition. So one of the things I'll be prioritizing coming in is with the passage of that initiative, which now prevents our ability to subsidize a lot of this transition. We might need to go back to the underlying legislation to adjust timelines. There might be increased costs, but this is something that I'm prioritizing early on in my discussions with the Office of Sustainability to understand how this will directly impact. We know there's a rough impact, but just discerning how do we problem solve around that. And so wanted to name that since we're talking about election outcomes and how we see things show up. Unfortunately, the passage of that will likely see that work impacted, whether it be in terms of timeline or cost to support that transition. And more details, of course, on the committee that I'm chairing, and happy to continue to bring updates on that point.
Thank you. Other questions from people on the call? One other thing I just want to touch on then, schools. Obviously, you know, as I mentioned before, the Seattle School District is in trouble. Much of the funding from schools comes from the state level. We have a special education funding problem too, as well, I believe, still. What is it that we might be able to do? What can we expect to see coming in this upcoming session to support schools, both, you know, K through 12, but also we have had, I think, an ongoing defunding of higher education, community college, technical schools, et cetera, in Washington over the decades.
Paul, I'm going to disagree with you on the last piece. Not that we couldn't do more, but actually we passed the Workforce Education Investment Act in 2019, state funding for higher education. So, you know, always more to do there. But that trend has really been reversed over the last few years. And Representative Chop couldn't count that as one of his major accomplishments. In terms of K-12 funding,
Jamie, sorry,
the primary
agreed
drivers.
on that. I think, though, that our higher education is still woefully underfunded, and the people involved, you know, professors there are paid very poorly in comparison to even often high school teachers. So, you know, I think when we look across the decades of, you know, pay funding versus GDP, et cetera, I think that we're still woefully below where we were many decades ago.
Really depends. That's probably a
Sorry, Jamie, your audio is cut out.
pretty broad difference with. Oh, can you hear me now?
Just intermittently. It might be more helpful to not have. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I just turned off my video. Does that help?
Yeah, it seems to.
Okay, so I was just saying, I think that it really depends whether you're professors at the University of Washington or adjunct professors at Seattle Central. There's a pretty broad band relates to market, and it really particular institution. But I just be cautious about painting with a really broad brush there. I think we can agree that there's to be made. With regard to K-12 education, the primary underfunding at the state level are services than what the state is. And so we have a significant funding, probably close to $500 million in the. Then after that, we have the problem of what are called maintenance supplies and operating costs. So everything from the cost of insurance for schools to the cost of utilities has gone up more than the rate at which we increase that funding, and that's produced a significant shortfall. And then the student transportation formula that we use also does not adequately fund. So the superintendent of public instruction requested an increase of roughly $3 billion for the biennium, about $1.5 billion per year. And that I think is what we'll be working toward. You know, I mentioned before both the high earner payroll tax and the wealth tax as options that we're considering. It's also possible that we will put more state money into a program that's called the Levy Equalization Program that would allow more state flexibility for wealthy districts, such as Seattle and many of the East Side or enrichments, for example, having small schools. So those are some of the things. A significant majority of my caucus, I suspect the same is true for the House Democrats, are very interested in making a substantial increase in education funding in the upcoming session. It's just a question of how we make that progress consistent with the larger budget shortfall that we're also facing.
Thanks. Anyone else want to talk to school funding?
Well, was happy to tour, I believe it was McGilver Elementary School with Alexis on the campaign trail, and just being able to see sort of firsthand what the stakes were for making sure that we're supporting working families at the root with quality education. I think one component of this and what the senator had sketched out, I think, is very, very comprehensive. The fact that part of the reason why we're in this mess at this particular juncture, facing school closures, not only in Seattle, in Olympia, other districts across the state, has to do with the fact that our present school funding model is the last vestige of a Republican-controlled state Senate. It was designed to be a revenue neutral, in many ways austerity-minded measure for funding our schools, that critics at the time in 2012, 2011, as it was first being debated, and then again when it was ratified in 2017, were predicting would be disastrous. And so I think a lot of those chickens have kind of come home to roost with respect to seeing those school closures, when we sort of knew that if we don't have ongoing progressive revenue to fund our schools, gradually that school funding from the state would get eroded. It is definitely the case that not only for higher education, but for K-12 education in the state of Washington, the overall percentage that we spend on those institutions expressed as a share of our overall state budget has declined. So I think that the short and medium term solutions that the senator called attention to, very, very important. And we also want to make sure that we're paying attention to the long-term goal of revamping how we fund our schools. This was a project that took 6 or 7 years from the time that was introduced at first in 2010 to the time it was eventually ratified in 2017. It's an immense political lift that's going to require a lot of outreach, a lot of research into how states of similar sizes are going about funding their schools. I know that that's something that Representative April Berg has began the work of, but that's something that I would like to make a big priority of mine for as long as I am in the state legislature, knowing that that's going to pay dividends for people of our state. At every juncture where we've had the opportunity to fund education, be it the establishment of the University of Washington, way back in the 1860s, creating our community college system in the 1960s, you hear the same kinds of ways of kicking the can down the road. And at every stage, our state leadership had decided that the short-term cost of ponying up the money that we need to fund our schools is preferable to the long-term cost of having subpar education. And I think that we're faced with a similar historical crossroad right now. And I feel confident that the state legislature is going to make the right decision with respect to funding our schools with a funding model that works over time and over the generations.
I think Jamie and Sean said it well. Funding for public schools is going to be a a top issue that will be under consideration this session. So I do want to just confirm what Jamie said, that this is an issue for House Democrats as well as for Senate Democrats. And so I think we'll be having lots of conversations about it. This is a problem, as Sean, I think, put really well. That's what has been a long time in the making. While we have made some strides in significant increases in state funding for public education, we have been so far behind, and we remain so far behind, particularly in those three areas that Jamie talked about. Those are the areas that we've been having a lot of detailed conversation about the need to fund. Seattle is disproportionately impacted in how we do our special education, and so the state resources really fall short of what it costs to provide special education in the Seattle district. So that is a top area of focus, in particular for Seattle legislators. And then, I think some of the challenge related to public education funding was somewhat masked by the COVID dollars from the federal government, which allowed this problem to kind of be not as visible for an amount of time. So the real serious big deficits we're hearing from the Seattle Public Schools Administration now is, this isn't just a surprise that landed on them. This has been many years in the making. And many of us have asked the school district and are now working closely with the school district on a partnership, which I don't think we really had before in how we address this challenge, right? The legislature is charged with funding public education. It's our paramount duty. And I think many of us are working really closely now, not just with the administration, but hearing from families. I think many of us in the Seattle delegation are going out to schools and listening. I spent a good chunk of my Sunday afternoon at a teach-in of multiple community groups coming together to educate families and advocates around how we got here and what are the options, and just how to engage with the legislature on public education funding. So I do anticipate that we're going to be spending a lot of time on this issue. And, there's a lot of reasons why I am very delighted that Jamie Peterson is the Senate Majority Leader. But one of them in particular is Jamie's passion and deep understanding of public education funding in our state. And his leadership, I think, is going to be tremendously helpful this session on this really important issue.
All right. We're at 8:45. I just want to say thank you to all four of you for taking an hour or more out of your Tuesday night to be here with us and to listen to our questions, give us your thoughts, give us a bit of hope, hopefully, for what we are facing in the coming weeks and months and years. And so thank you all for this. Very excited again, Sean, to have you as our rep in Olympia, and Alexis, for you to be starting to be our rep in less than 7 days. And congratulations again, Jamie, on being majority leader. And Nicole, thank you for your leadership and as well. When you said you were elected for the first time the same night as Trump, I was gobsmacked. I thought you've been in the legislature a lot longer than that. My memory is obviously not great. But thank you all four of you for joining with us here tonight. All right, if we can just remove the spotlights from everybody. We will turn now to let me go back to our agenda. If we have any reports from our committee chairs at this point, I'll open the floor to them. I'll just go through in turn on these. Finance. Is anything there from Brad?
Nothing tonight, thanks.
All right, thanks, Brad. Ryan, anything more on PCOs?
Now, just to reiterate, if you are a current PCO, you should have received an email reminding you of if you were either when your term is going to be ending. If you're an elected PCO, you should have also gotten an email about that. If you're in any way confused, I'll throw my PCO committee chair email into the chat. Please email me if you have any confusion around what your standing is. And then just a reminder again for anyone who's an appointed PCO that or anyone who didn't run for election as a PCO but would like to continue to be a PCO, let me know. And anyone who's not a PCO right now but is like, oh, what's this PCO thing? I'd be interested. We're going to be recruiting new PCOs continuously, and so we'd love to have anyone who'd like to be that intersection between their community and the party. So I'll throw my email in the chat for any questions anyone might have.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Let's see, policy advocacy, Jeremy.
No, nothing additional. Thanks again, Ryan, for that presentation. Next iteration will, of course, be what are the policies to advocate for. So nothing additional at this time. Thank you.
Thanks. Technology, Liam.
Nothing to report tonight, thank you.
Thanks. Andrew, anything from King County to note?
With reorg happening, reorg meeting is December 12th, at 12 noon. The link will be sent to all PCOs or people who run, and it will be available on streaming apps like YouTube and Facebook. On that day, by 11 o'clock, there will be a brief training on how the ballots and votings will go. And then December 11th, I think, would be the swearing in of new PCOs. Now, the December 1st, we will open the applications for people who want to run in the next reorg for King County Dems. And there will be various opportunities to talk to PCOs between December 6th and December 15th. And details will be sent to everyone's email who is an elected PCO. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And then state, Amy or Sam? I'm not sure either are able to make it tonight. It doesn't look like either are able to make it. With that, I will open it up to good of the order. If anyone has anything good of the order. You just feel free to unmute and go for it if you do. All right. With that, we did have the resolution on Fort Lawton affordable housing. Unfortunately, because we haven't made quorum today, we weren't able to do a vote on that. We will continue to hold that resolution and bring it forward at a future meeting when we do have a quorum. And with that, thank you very much, everyone. And good night.